Howdy and welcome to Chapter 5. In Chapter 5 we'll be talking about designing effective EHRD programs, which is the second step of the process model that we started last week. Last week we talked about the first step, which was doing a training needs analysis. So after conducting the training needs analysis and finding that training will fix the problem, then we move on to this phase where we actually design a program. So this week we'll be talking about writing training objectives. This will be an important part of this chapter. We'll identify sources where HRD programs can be obtained. We'll compare the merits of developing in-house versus outside source training. We'll talk about activities involved in employer design programs. We'll compare training materials and talk about some constraints in regard to scheduling programs. There are some basic design issues that we need to consider after a needs assessment. We should be addressing whether this can be fixed by training or an HRD intervention. Then how do we take the results of the needs assessment and translate it into a specific intervention? Then if training is necessary, are we going to do it in-house or are we going to outsource that? How are we going to find an effective trainer for this project? What's the best way to organize this program? How should training methods and materials be selected? Should we use technology? Are there scheduling issues? So these are some of the basic questions that this chapter seeks to answer regarding training design. This is the model we started looking at last week, the 4-phase model. Last week we talked about assessment. So we talked about assessing needs and prioritizing needs. This week we'll be talking about the design phase, where we define objectives and develop lesson plans and materials, talk about who's going to train, and schedule. Next week we'll talk about how we actually implement and deliver this program. And the week after we'll talk about how to evaluate whether it's been successful and effective. So we'll start off by talking about objectives. A performance objective is a detailed description of what learners will be able to do when they complete a unit of instruction. And these are very important to the design process for several reasons. First being that it provides students with a clear purpose to focus on their learning efforts. So we provide students a clear purpose for the training. And to focus their learning efforts on. And research has shown just the mere fact that we disclose performance objectives to our trainees helps them actually become motivated and learn the material. So that's important. The second one is to direct the choice of instructional activities. And this is for the designer. So once I know the objectives, I can look at what are the instructional activities that I can design that will most certainly help reach those objectives. And then third, it guides assessment strategies. So in other words, once I know what I want my learners to do after training, I can design assessments to measure whether that's occurring. So that's important. According to Major, the book talks a lot about Major, there are 3 parts to an effective objective. The first part is performance, the second part is conditions, and the third part is criteria. So all good objectives will have these 3 parts: performance, conditions, and criteria. So the first one is performance. So performance is basically what it sounds like. It's the behavior learners are expected to perform, is what we're talking about. What behavior are learners expected to perform? Okay? And it's important that these behaviors be measurable and observable. And you'll see as we go through why that's so critical, why we want to measure the behaviors that are measurable and observable. This describes what the learner will be doing when they're mastering the objective. Okay, so I can tell by measuring and observing whether the learner has mastered the objective. So, for example, it could be to be able to dance, to be able to interview, to be able to paint a picture. I can observe and measure all of those things. So in these instances, I can tell when somebody is performing the task. Okay. So what the learner will be doing when demonstrating achievement of the objective is important. So here's some bad examples. For instance, be able to understand mathematics. Develop an appreciation of music. Those are so vague and broad, I really can't tell when someone is actually doing those behaviors. So think of better ways we can say that. Understanding math, we should be able to be more specific and make that more measurable and observable. The second part of an objective describe the conditions. The conditions is a description of the circumstances under which the performance will be carried out. Okay, so it's the circumstances under which the performance described in the first part, okay, will be carried out. It also may include a description of what will be available to learners as they perform the desired behavior. So what is available to learners? In order to identify key conditions, we can ask ourselves, what will the learners be expected to use when performing? Okay, that would apply to this one. Can they use tools, charts, forms, study aids, and some kind of instructions? I mean, what is it that's available to them that they can use? Secondly, what will the learner not be allowed to use? Are we going to say that the learner from memory has to perform this task without using study aids? So what will they not use? And what will be the real-world conditions under which this is expected to occur? Is this going to be in a manufacturing plant? Is it going to be in front of a large audience? So what are the conditions it's going to occur? So some examples of conditions could be given a standard set of tools and a malfunctioning motor. Okay, those would be the conditions, probably followed by the learner will repair the motor. Using a metric ruler, given a set of whole numbers, in the presence of an irate customer, without the aid of notes. Okay, given a list of chemical elements, and kind of get the idea. These are all conditions of what the learner will have and what they are expected to do. Okay. Then the third one is criterion. Okay, and criterion is a description of the criteria for acceptance of the performance. Okay, so what are the criteria for acceptance of the performance? Okay, whatever it is we want the learner to do, performance, as sufficient. Okay, so this is going to indicate mastery of the objective. Okay, so we're looking for those conditions that tell us whether someone has mastered the objective. In other words, how well must it be done? Okay, how well must it be done? To what extent are we looking for? How well must it be done? So this lets learners know how well they have to perform to be competent. Okay, it also provides a standard against which to test the success of the instruction and gives us a way of evaluating whether or not the learners can, in fact, do what we set out to teach them to do. So the criterion would be things like speed and accuracy. So some examples of speed, I could say they have to do this action in under 2 hours, within 15 minutes, before midnight. Okay, that would be a speed criterion. Accuracy gives a range of acceptable performance. So things like within 2 inches to the nearest whole number, with no more than 2 incorrect entries in the blog, no more than 2 spelling errors. So that would be an accuracy criterion. So here is an example of an objective containing all 3 components as a summary. Students will tell the time represented on an analog clock to the nearest minute. Okay, students will tell the time represented on an analog clock to the nearest minute. So tell time represents the performance. We want them to tell the time. Analog clock is the condition. So given an analog clock, students will be able to tell time. To the nearest minute is the criterion. Okay, a poorly written objective along the same topic would say students will know how to tell time. So you guys see the difference with having those 3 steps in there versus not having them in there. So as a review of how we write objectives, the first part is the conditions. Conditions is a description of the tools and resources that will be available to the learner while performing the skill. Okay, behavior is a description of the skill that would include actions, content, and concepts. And criteria is a description of acceptable performance of the skill. And one thing to caution you about, because we're going to practice doing this, we can't use vague verbs. Okay, for instance, if I say, know how to play the piano, I'm not really sure what that means. Okay, it's very vague. It has to be measured. How do I measure this? Or using words like appreciate, be aware of, learn, gain knowledge of the history of World War II. Okay, how do I measure whether they've gained that knowledge? Okay, so don't use these sorts of words when you're writing objectives. We have to use words that are measurable and observable. Okay, so after the objectives have been defined, now we have to decide whether we're going to create or purchase the program. So we have to look at various services that are available to us. Things like assisting with the needs assessment, on designing or implementing the program, providing supplemental training materials, conducting a train-the-trainer program. So lots of things that we can outsource in this regard. So some typical sources could be consulting firms or educational institutions, non-profit community-based organizations we could reach out to assist with this. Mainly consultants would be the ones we would be using. So why would an organization do that? Why would I ever want to contract out my training design? Couple reasons. First, maybe I don't have the expertise in-house on this particular topic. Okay, maybe I'm training people in how to design a web page. There's no one on my staff that can do that currently. So I would want to have someone come in and teach that. Secondly, management would not have time to design the program. Okay, it's a matter of time. Maybe this is a compliance issue and I have to do this training very quickly, so I don't have the time to do this. The third one is perhaps there is not an HRD department, no HRD department or full-time HRD professional that could do this. So I'm going to contract that out. The next decision is to select a trainer. Okay, and a trainer has to have training competency. Training competency. They have to have the knowledge and varied skills needed to design and implement a program. So not only knowledge about the topic they're trying to teach, but also instructional methods, how to actually teach. We would look for subject matter experts. Subject matter experts, or SMEs. Okay, so subject matter experts are people that know a lot about the subject. Okay, so training's most effective when trainers possess an advanced level of expertise as instructors and facilitators. So if someone knows, for instance, a lot about web design, they may not be the best instructor to teach someone else, but they have a lot of expertise in that subject. So a lot of companies do train the trainer training. Sounds kind of funny. Train the trainer training, in which we provide the SME with the necessary instructional knowledge and skills to be able to implement the program. Okay, so we teach somebody with a lot of expertise in a subject how to actually teach. We teach them the instructional knowledge and skills. So is it important to have a good trainer? Have you ever had a bad trainer? I can think back to times when I've been to training where the trainer has not been really great, and it's made the whole training experience less than what it could be. And companies spend a lot of money on training, and it's always difficult when you have a trainer that isn't the best at doing this. Because you could have a fabulous training program, but a bad trainer will cancel out any kind of effort made. The next thing we have to do is prepare a lesson plan. A lesson plan translates the objectives into an executable training session. Okay, so we take our objectives. So we translate objectives into a training session. So I'm taking those objectives I wrote with the 3 criteria, I'm using them to write a lesson plan and decide, what kind of content should I cover, to cover these objectives. How should I sequence it? What kind of media should I use? What kind of exercises? Should I do experiential learning? Should I do group activity? How long should I spend on these things? What method should I use? How will I evaluate? What are the evaluations I should use? So here's an example lesson plan. If the objective is to recall the steps of the intake process, I think this is something to do with an insurance clerk. It says, here are the materials I'm going to use to teach this. Here are the procedures. It's going to take me 15 minutes. Okay. Then the next objective is apply HIPAA regulations to the registration process. Here's what I'm going to use. I'm going to divide students into groups and ask them to identify methods. That's going to take me about 30 minutes. Okay, and the book has a couple really great examples of lesson plans. So I encourage you to go and look at that because we'll be doing a lesson plan for our project. Okay, then I want to talk a little bit about e-learning and HRD, and a lot of this isn't in the book. I found the book a bit outdated when it came to e-learning issues, and I think this is really important because the trend is going toward e-learning. So how is e-learning different from traditional learning? You're obviously in an e-learning class, so you know these differences definitely. And from an instructor perspective, you probably haven't thought of it this way, but it's different in that I don't know how the students react to what I'm writing and saying because I'm not there to look at the body language or, ask direct questions. So it's more difficult. We have to use technology to get these points across. Most instructors have not taught online, and there's not a really great program to teach them how to do so. We try our best, but oftentimes it's sort of a learn as you go sort of thing. Instructors have to be able to motivate people and support people and lead everyone to be independent because studying online is very independent, as you know. Other differences, the online curriculum is different than face-to-face. The social dynamic is different. We don't have where we go into the classroom and we see each other. Assessment strategies have to be different. There can be technical challenges. So a lot of differences between e-learning and traditional learning that we have to consider. I thought this was interesting. This lists some e-learning trends of 2018, talks about micro-learning. Micro-learning is really interesting, and this is how I think things are going to go in the future, in that people in the workplace want to know a small thing when they want to know it. So in other words, we have videos of 3 to 5 minutes in length because this person, if I want to know how to write a what-if statement in Excel, I don't want to go through a whole Excel training program. I just want to know that. So I want to zero in on it. That's what micro-learning is. Okay, and this says also we're going to be using a lot of video to train people. Virtual reality, okay, and augmented reality being used in learning and development will become a trend. A lot more mobile learning. People always have their phone with them, and we can, bring learning to where people are when they want the learning. Game-based learning, gamification, is going to be a trend. Okay. So some more trends I found. So one of the benefits of e-learning, okay, since you're e-learning right now, you may agree with this. E-learning and tutoring at your own pace. I mean, you're doing this on your own time. Less time to complete virtual training than classroom training. Okay. E-learning is always available 24/7. Available from the comfort of your home. Similar setup costs. And open for all age groups. And also many different types of people, different learning styles can benefit from e-learning. This just goes into some of the trends. Talks about $165 billion. That's the size of the e-learning market, 5.8 million students in online classes. It's predicted by 2019, 50% will be online. I think that's very true. As you can see, and I think this one's interesting. 90% of students think online learning is the same or better than traditional classroom. Okay, what do you think? Okay, it's interesting. And this is explained by some theories of adult education. We talked about this in Chapter 3. We talked about andragogy and Malcolm Knowles. And this really applies to e-learning because adults, because of the characteristics of adults, e-learning makes a lot of sense. Adults like to feel they have control, which they would. They want to define learning. They want to decide how to learn. Adults have a lot of personal experience and appreciate an educational resource, such as e-learning. Adults want to acquire information for solving problems today. Adults who volunteer to learn are more intrinsically motivated. That's important. Adults taking continuing education to upgrade or update skills and knowledge needed in employment. So adults take it upon themselves to increase their skills and knowledge to be more marketable in the marketplace. Okay, so a couple theories of distance education. This particular theory is really interesting. It says that for learning to occur, there has to be 3 separate interactions in an online environment. You as a student, you have to interact with the content, okay, the actual content of the course. You need some kind of an interaction with the instructor. You need to identify with the instructor. And you need interaction with peers. You have to be able to identify with peers. And when these 3 interactions are occurring, e-learning is maximized. These are some effective e-learning designing strategies. Okay, so we talks about defining outcomes, okay, kind of like objectives, knowing the target audience, screen content, using videos effectively, integrating games, using intelligent assessments, making learners accountable. So all these things are just, I thought, interesting design features that make e-learning pretty good. That's it for Chapter 5. I hope you found something interesting, and I hope you go back and read the objectives, write how to write objectives again, and listen to that again, because we're going to be working on that quite a bit. So, thank you.